Good evening, 6 o'clock. The Red Sea rules. Realize that God means for you to be where you are. Hey, we have a great Bible study prepared for you tonight. Great book study. I'm so excited. We finally got to chapter 1. We've done the preface or preface, and I'm excited about what God is about to do in us, through us, and for us by way of the Red Sea rules. 10 God-given strategies for difficult times. Let me go to the latter slide to give us a thrust. Here's a thrust for tonight. Sometimes we can be at the right place. It just seems like we are in a bad spot. Who am I talking to tonight? You know you at the right place, but it seems like the spot is just bad. You at church, you're in the choir, you're on the praise team, you're ushering, you're media, you're producing, you're executing, you're in the right place. But sometimes it just seems like it's a bad spot. Tonight for the Red Sea rules, we're going to talk about being in the right place, but sometimes seeming like it's in a bad spot. Let's go to the front of our Red Sea rules. What is our vision for 2020 for Bible study? We want to make sure there's spiritual formation. Remember, you're at the right place. It just seems like a bad spot. Something ought to be spiritually multiplying in your life, even when you're in the right place, but a bad spot. There ought to be intimate fellowship. You ought to be fellowshipping with God and with others in your right place. And you ought to be transformed deeply because you're in your right place. So we're looking for deep transformation, intimate fellowship, spiritual multiplication, and formation. Because we in the right place, it just seems like it's a bad spot. Hey, y'all, we welcome you tonight to the Red Sea rules. Here it is. When you think of your Red Seas, acrostic, when you think of your Red Seas, when you think of how things are happening in your life, the spots you're in, the places you're in, you know you're in the right place. As a matter of fact, God wants you to be where you are tonight. He literally wants you to be where you are. You couldn't be at a better place in your life. You saying, Pastor, that cannot be so. Remember, he wanted the 3 Hebrew boys in a fiery furnace, right place. He realized, and they had to realize where they were. That was the right place for them. But when I think of the Red Sea for my acrostic, for my icebreaker, I think the Red Sea, being in the right place with a bad spot, sometimes the Red Sea can be rude in my life. Sometimes the Red Sea, not sometimes, but all this time, the Red Sea is real. Not only is it rude, it's real. The Red Sea can be ruthless. In the right place, at a bad spot. Realize that God means for you to be where you are. You're in a place that they're treating you unfairly. You're being treated unjustly. You're being treated unkindly. Rudeness is real, it's ruthless, but you in the right place. Not only the letter R, you have the letter E. The Red Seas, all of our Red Seas are exhausting. They're exhausting. When we finally get to a place where we want to move forward, but we can't move forward. Because guess what? We're too exhausted. Am I talking to anybody in here tonight? Thirdly, our Red Seas are demanding. Our Red Seas demand our focus. They demand our time. They demand our strength. They demand our energies. That's our Red Sea. Am I talking to anybody tonight? Fourthly, our Red Seas, for Drika and myself, we get suffocated in suffering. Yes, when we get to the Red Seas of our life, we realize God means for us to be where we are. We're in the right place, but it seems like a bad spot because I'm suffocating and suffering. Then fifthly, our Red Seas are educational. They educate us about the will of God, the way of God, the wisdom of God, the wealth of God, the power of God, the presence of God, the person of God. Our Red Seas educate us about God. Our Red Seas make us see how effortless it is for God to part what we can't part. It's effortless for God, but it takes effort on our part. And then finally, our Red Seas are aggressive. Can I talk to anybody other than myself and drinker today? Our Red Seas are aggressive. I mean, sometimes we have to wrestle with some things in our life, and guess what? Wrestling, sometimes we don't always come out on the victorious end, or it seems to be initially, but those are our Red Seas. And then last but not least, our Red Seas are abnormal. These are abnormalities in my life. And let me just throw this in for free. It's never been suggested that the children of Israel/Egypt knew how to swim. It's never been suggested they knew how to swim. Never been suggested. But here's what I love about God. The thing that you know you can't do, when you get to it, God will make a way for you won't even have to do what you can't do. Because he's going to part that Red Sea in front of you. I'm grateful tonight for the Red Sea rules. Remember, realize rule number 1, God means for you to be where you are. Rule number 1, God means for you to be where you are. Yes, he does. He means for you to be where you are. Great icebreaker. Thank you. Let me go. Sometimes, just to make the transition, we can be at the right place. It just seems like we are in a bad spot. Pastor Stephen Glenn of the Greater View Primitive Baptist Church. Thank you for that quote, and a son of this house. Let's go back. Let's talk about this Red Sea rules. Let's talk about this mother. You should have your book with you in your hand. You should have this book by now. You should be reading this book. You should be walking with us through this particular text and passage. This is the Red Sea rules. I promise you. It says, now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they may turn and camp before Pi-Hathroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite of Baal-Zephon. Yes, I know those words are hard to pronounce, but hey, I've heard them over 50,000 times in my life, so it's a little fluid with me. But today in this particular passage, y'all, we dealing with this mother and her son. And you, once again, chapter 1, page 1, rule 1, realize God means for you to be where you are. Let's talk about a mother's love. There's nothing like a mother's love. A mother's love is, listen to this, mother's love is the fuel. This shouts us, Drika. Mother's love is the fuel that enables normal human being to do the impossible. A normal individual can do the impossible because a mother's love is the thing that fuels him. And that's why we thank God for mothers today. Everybody, biological or brothers who reared and raised you, they gave you the fuel to do the impossible. That's why this particular passages and text and chapter focuses on the mother of Dylan. Dylan had a praying mother. And if you, my brothers, my sisters, my saints, my friends, even sinners, if you have not joined the church yet, you ought to thank God for a mother who prayed you through, who gave you the fuel to do the abnormal, to do the impossible. Another quote says, all that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother. That's why this passage is so profound, and this book and this study is so profound, because Moses never would have been able to do what he done had it not been for his mother. Realize, rule number 1, that God wants you to be where you are. Who do we focus in and focus on this chapter? Dylan. Page 1, page 2, page 3. You ought to be flipping. Dylan. What do we know about Dylan, y'all? What do we know about Dylan? Dylan, he was angry, he was agitated, he was annoyed. These are some of the character traits of Dylan. Yes, Dylan had come home from the war, but Dylan had a praying mother. Dylan had a mother who made sure she gave him the fuel he needed to do the abnormal, to do the impossible. Dylan's mother. Why is it so important that we focus on in pages 2 and 3 of Dylan's mother? How did his mother influence his life? She was a praying woman. As a matter of fact, on page 2, just let me read it to you. It said, but her mother's instincts told her when he was in harm's way, and during those times, she fervently prayed for Dylan day and night. She was undoubtedly praying for him that night he swam 10 miles from a submarine to forbidden coast of a hostile country. She was praying the night he parachuted behind enemy lines. She was praying the night he jumped from a chopper through the hail of bullets. She was praying that night a terrorist stuck a gun in his face and it jammed for a second so he could resolve the problem and remain safe. That is the power of a praying woman. So how did his mother influence his life? You want to answer that question. Number 2, how did he cope with his PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Dylan had it. He came home, and this is for all of us, even if we're not soldiers in the natural. When we go through something traumatic, it leaves us traumatized. How do we cope with it? All of us have post-traumatic. Listen, okay, Drika, we might not have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Let me put it out there for all you Christians. We got post-traumatic storm syndrome. How about that? When we go through a storm in our life, when we go through storms in our life, how do you cope after a storm? Even when God gets you out and pulls you through, you still messed up. Can I get a witness? I've been pulled out, I've been pulled through, but I'm still messed up. I'm messed up emotionally. I'm messed up psychologically. Remember, Capri Cares this morning, this week, healing is an ugly process. I need to talk to somebody who's healing right now. And guess what? I've learned through my own surgeries and sutures that when you're healing, you can't move like you want to. Especially when you got broken bones and you've been bruised in places. You want to walk at a different pace, but you can't, because guess what? You are healing, and healing can be an ugly process. So how did he cope? He went to the bars. He went to the clubs. He started drinking. He started doing things with his life that were not helping him, but hurting him. And sometimes, even as a believer, we are so bitter, we are so broken that we do things in our life that do not help us. They make us bitter instead of better. But how do you make it through your post-traumatic storm syndrome? All of us got PTSD, y'all. All of us got PTSD. If you don't believe me, Peter said, Lord, carest thou not that we perish in the middle of a storm. Peter had PTSD. Yes, he did. He was dysfunctional. So don't let people punk you and prime you to think that you have to have it all together. Because through the book and the Bible that we have, remember my Bible's on my iPad, a whole lot of people didn't come out their storm like they went in. They came out better, but it was a process. And that's why God gives us these strategies in this book to help us with our processes when we're going through. How do we cope with ours? This would be a good time that you can tag, comment, how do you cope with your PTSD? What can we infer? We can infer that Dylan did not transition well back into mainstream. That's what we can infer. He didn't come back the way he left. He came back a hero, but he came back hurt. He came back stronger, but he came back suffering. He came back a warrior, but he came back weakened. He didn't get back into the mainstream the way he left, y'all. And that's who Dylan was. What else can we infer? That trauma left Dylan in a terrible place and condition. Trauma left him in a terrible place. Trauma left him in a terrible place and condition. And oftentimes in our life, we are left in a terrible place and condition. But remember, Red Sea rule number 1, realize that God means for you to be where you are. Character traits, questions, inferences, connections. Text to text. Take this text and connect it with the Bible. Dylan was like King Saul. He was accomplished but miserable. Can I get an amen? You've done a lot in life, but you're still miserable. Text to self. All of us can connect with this. Life has a way of making us feel just miserable, even when we have done some great things. That's what happened to Dylan. He could not connect. He had too much post-traumatic stress syndrome, post-traumatic storm disorder. Yes, he had it. Then thirdly, text the world. Now we live in a Dylan type of world where people are successful, but they're committing, heinous crimes. People are doing things because they cannot feel the peace that they need, but they have to realize God means for them to be where they are. Rule number 1, Red Sea rules. You got to get this book, y'all. I'm grateful. So you have your connections, You have your questions. You have your character traits. You have your inferences. Look at this. And what page are we on? You should be about flipping to page 3 and 4 and 5. As you're walking through, let me read this quote on worry and give you this and walk you through this picture. Here's what it says, Andrika. It says, worry is putting a question mark where God puts a comma. You know, Drika, she can't shout, y'all, but she'll be tearing up stuff. See, that's why I can't do this with you. That's why I can't do this with you. Listen, worry is putting a question mark where God put a comma. Where God put periods, Quit putting question marks where God has ended your suffering, where God has ended your sorrow. Quit questioning it. Worry is putting a question mark where God has put periods. My bad. Here, walk into this picture. What do you see? I see hands, hair, eyes, ears, eyelashes, eyebrows, fingers, knuckles. The list goes on and on. I see a suit coat. I see a tie. You can go on and on. That's just what you see. But what is expressed in this picture? Worry, fatigue, frustration, upset, isolation. What is implied by this picture? Worry comes in all types of emotions. Worry makes us sick. Worry is an unhealthy emotion. Worry is fretful to our faith. And he worried. Dylan worried. You and I worry. And Jesus said this, take no thought for tomorrow will take care of itself. Listen, there it is. Worry is a form of atheism, for it betrays a lack of faith and trust in God. Worry can seem as inherent as breathing. Sometimes worry becomes so natural. But remember, rule number 1, God means for you to be where you are. Here it is. When you are at a difficult place, realize that the Lord either placed you there or allowed you to be there for reasons perhaps known of or now only to himself. That's what the Lord does. And as we close today, sometimes we can just be at the right place. It seems like we had a bad spot. Rule number 1 for the Red Sea rules. Realize God means for you to be where you are. What am I going to stop doing? I'm going to try to stop worrying. What am I going to continue to do? I'm going to continue to trust God even in the midst of me being unhealthy and worrying. What am I going to start doing? I'm going to start reminding myself that God knows where I am and he wants me to be right where I need to be. So his will, his way, his wisdom, and everything that he has for me can be known in my life. Hey, y'all, it's the Red Sea Rules. Robert J. Morgan, 10 difficult strategies for hard times. Thank you for tonight's Bible/book study here at Ephesian Primitive Baptist Church, 1506 22nd Avenue, North Nashville, Tennessee.